tuned into the Relay FM.
Did I make it all up in my mind? Wish that I could look back to see.
Hello, dear listeners. Signal here. Thanks for tuning in. Now, if memory serves, in accordance to my last video, I promised you I would talk about what happened to Living Among Stars and its predecessor. Well, after a bit of a wait that I do apologize for, today is that day. So, I'll be going through a lot of stuff. As such, I hope you've gotten comfortable. I hope you have your snacks. It's going to be a bit of a doozy. Now, recap time. Living Among Stars was a book I wanted to write back when I had just gotten into the idea of storytelling. It was inspired by a video game I was playing at the time, and the cast of the book were all inspired by myself and my friends at the time. The basic premise of the plot was an adventure into space that would quickly turn its head, or at least onto its head, and the very ill-prepared protagonists needed to find a way to not only survive, but adapt as well. Now, the main cast itself had originally included about 10 characters that I wanted to follow, and support characters along with that. I had planned things like betrayals, fight scenes, love triangles, and of course, tragic character deaths, because who didn't love the pain of a character they liked dying? Now, in the story itself, I went through 5 different versions before I realized the story needed to change entirely. Now, while I don't remember exactly what was going on, I'll try to remember what changed in each version of the story. Now, version 1 was, of course, the introduction, the very beginning, and I do believe in this version of the story the characters were in high school, and instead of going to college afterwards, they were going to travel the stars. In this, I really don't believe I made it past, like, the high school phase and some introductions. But, actually, now that I've taken a look into the original document, which, yes, I still surprisingly have the original document, I was very wrong. And most of this surprisingly decent writing was about them in school together, prepping for exams to qualify for the space program. Now, that's how I had education set up at the time, just as a brief side note. Uh, Again, huge anime fan and whatnot, and a lot of entrance exams and all that fun jazz. I had turned that into something similar to where it was prep exams for the space program. Now, by the looks of it, I had stopped really just as some characters were getting to know each other. And I actually don't know why I stopped. I had gotten 5 chapters deep into the story, and looking back at it, everyone was on a shuttle that would take them to Mars, the training planet. And yes, I terraformed Mars in this version of the story, and we were recolonizing it. Not recolonizing it, we were just colonizing it essentially. By this point in the story, I had introduced some characters and developed relationships with some existing ones, and then I just stopped. Don't know why. No idea why I stopped actually. I do find it a bit weird, but I digress. Version 2 of the story was actually much shorter, at least chapter wise, but I had changed some of the characters' names and tried I decided to try and do the introduction a little bit different this time. Like I said, I was only 2 chapters deep in that one, however, so I didn't really get to go too far. Now, from what I'm looking at, they did seem to have an equal, if not maybe slightly longer length than the original 5 chapters I did, but still, only having 2, it doesn't really give me much to work with. I don't remember what made me not only restart the story, but then also just stop after 2 chapters. And I'll see this a lot in even my works to this day, where I'll have varying versions of a story and then just stop to rewrite it to fix some things. Now, version 3 of the story had actually unfortunately been lost to me, and I regret that so much. I don't really know what happened to it. I can't locate it no matter how much I try, and I've been really trying for years at this point. Actually, hold on, because I'm looking at my like notes and my all my fun stuff here. I actually do know what happened. So, back in the day, a little less so now, but back in the day, I primarily used Google Documents to write my stories. It was easy for me to do at school. I could just sign into Gmail, work on Google Docs in between assignments. I can go home, do the same thing. I didn't have to worry about a particular copy like I did when I wrote my first story, because that one I believe I did in Microsoft Word. No, or no, maybe I did it in Google Documents. I don't know, but I know Google Documents and its ability to be worked on so long as you're signed in anywhere and not have to have five different copies of the same book that don't cross sync is actually, that's helpful. But anyways, I had a separate Gmail at the time. I think back at that point I had like three or four, maybe. I don't know. I had one I wanted to use professionally, one just because I'd never had. That was my first Gmail, and then I had one I was sharing with a friend at the time, or I think my ex. Yeah, no, we're friends now, but at the time we were like dating. Uh, but I had shared a Gmail with them, and in this Gmail account, I had version 3. And I didn't, for whatever reason, share it with myself or send it to myself to be copied. I had just assumed it'd always be there. And then one day, we broke up, yada yada yada. I had no more use for the email, neither did she, so I deleted it. And it was at that point I realized well, not realized, but at that point, years later, I realized I had actually deleted version 3, which got me to now making copies of things, but I digress. Um, yeah, unfortunately, I deleted it, and it just sucks. I didn't realize it until it was too late, so I can't tell you what was really in version 3. I think if my memory is to be believed, I think version 3 was me just expanding upon that part of the story. Like, I think I couldn't find version 2 at the time, didn't know what happened to it, so I just rewrote the story or copied and pasted it to like where I believed I could go and went from there. Because I think at the time as well, I had a paper copy of the story, so I was retyping the paper copy into Gmail, and it was just a whole mess. Um, Now version 4 actually, things really, and I mean really, took a turn. And again, I mean really took that turn. This version actually expanded upon a lot of things and really kind of rewrote the concept of the story. I aged up the characters, I added to the lore. Uh, I actually got around 7 or 8 chapters into the story, and I included smut. Yeah, I'm addressing the elephant in the room first. I did say smut. If you don't know what that is, good for you. If you know what it is, I'm not going to be shamed. Go ahead, throw your shame. But that's kind of what happens when you're a young adult and you have a vivid imagination and your concept of relationship includes characters having sex. More on at least the characters, a little bit. But again, I had really made some major changes to the story. Uh, this was no longer Earth. It wasn't in the solar system we knew. It wasn't a home planet. It was a planet now by the new name of Myceria. It was in a solar system with a big star, a big powerful star. There were 3 other planets in the habitable zone. Because I was really into like planetary science at this time, and I was trying to find a viable way to make that happen. So there were 2 other planets in this. I don't remember the name of the first one. I do remember it being a more jungle-based world where there were animals, yes, but the sentient dominant species on this was actually plants with like tree-like beings, if I remember correctly. And I wasn't really looking into comics at the time, but looking back at it, if I were to give a comparison, I'd probably say this species of planet, what, the dominating species was practically just Groot, a whole bunch of Groot beings. Um, so yeah, there was that. And then I had Etheria, the other planet. And Etheria became so important almost immediately. Uh, but I'll get to that in a second. I will say, however, on as far as Earth goes and like what I kept of the original story, there was a thing with Earth or Myceria now, where some stayed on the original planet that they kind of destroyed, some expanded to the stars, and some just stayed on another planet. I kept that going. Uh, all three planets that have a relationship going on with each other. I think it was like a trade situation going, but Etheria and Myceria were the two interconnected ones. So I had that going for it. I actually should find the names. I think at some point I did cover the names of each planet. Uh, Maybe I'll do that another time. Maybe, if I remember. But again, as characters instead would go to Mars, now they would go to Etheria and they would train on this new, to them, alien planet, which would give them the experience they needed to then go out into the stars. Um, Now, from there, this plot, I was gonna say it took a shift. It did take a major shift. It was no longer gonna be a civil war, as I had planned in the first three versions of the story. Now it was gonna be something that the essentially planetary coalition would have to resolve. A true adventure that they would have to fix. Um, I do believe at this time as well, because I had introduced Etheria as my serious partner, that I really dove into them at the time as well. I remember adding in some sort of power system to where characters were given a crest that would give them certain powers. I don't remember what it was or what the powers did. I just remember it was something that the Mycerians would be given from the Etherians, aka space elves. Um, there was something like that that would essentially give them power. Now, from there, jeez, this is where it gets a little more toxic and bad writing. Oh boy. So, from there, um, the main protagonist of the book, which was based off of me, I will call him Endry or Idri. I'm calling him Idri for now. Idri was torn between two relationships in the story. Again, this was supposed to be my standing character, not representing me as like a person, just more so I wanted a character that I liked the most. I wanted a main character and I wanted to give him trouble. So I gave him this. He was torn between two relationships. One relationship he craved, and another relationship that craved him. I should also mention at this time that I was really watching some Ichi anime. I think one of them was High School DxD at the time, or the other one was High School of the Dead. I think I was watching both at the time. Um, just a brief little side note for those who don't know. The main protagonist, I'll probably lean into High School of the Dead for this one. The main protagonist in High School of the Dead, whose names I don't really remember anybody's names. The main protagonist was surviving the zombie apocalypse. He had to kill his best friend because his best friend turned to a zombie. And then from here, he was essentially going around trying to survive the apocalypse with his ex-girlfriend, who he still maybe kind of liked. This new girl, not necessarily new girl, this other girl who happened to be there. You had his childhood friend, who was a very rich, not necessarily pick me girl, but your classic bratty rich girl. You had some fat nerdy kid who was actually really into the rich childhood friend, and you had the bimbo nurse. Um, Now the characters that I kind of focused on when it comes to creating Endry and his relationship was more or less what was going on with the main protagonist and the two girls that interacted with him. You had the ex-girlfriend who didn't really like him like that anymore. They were kind of friends, and I don't know why they broke up. She was just kind of mad at him for something, and that kind of continued on in the story. But at some point, he had to survive with the girl with the sword, who, I don't know if they were really friends before this. but they had to survive with each other, and they, they got along. I do believe, looking back at it, that they had sex at some point, because they were just in the morning surrounded by zombies, and it's like, oh, where do they come from if they require noise? Anyways, yeah, yeah. I might rewatch it just because it's funny sometimes. But Andrew had his childhood friend Yuki. Yuki had been nice to him for years. They grew up together from very early on. They were always friends. She was a little bit older than he was, maybe like by a year or two, and they were close friends. Eventually, he started falling in love with her, and she didn't really see him that way. She didn't see him romantically, like in any capacity. Um, and as the years went on, um, Andrew would make some friends and whatnot. He'd, go about his life, and at some point, he just stopped loving Yuki. At least to the point where he was kind of obsessed with her. And it's weird because shortly after that, she started loving him. I never really went into the details of why or how their relationship really worked or got to that point, but I do believe, as far as the story is concerned, we're now in the point where. Oh no, sorry, I hit my mic a second ago. As far as the story is concerned, we're now in the dynamic of Yuki really likes Andrew. She loves Andrew. And he just kind of sees her as a really close friend who just happens to be beautiful. Um, but it should also be said that by the time he falls out of love with her, it doesn't take very long before he meets another friend. And they get really close. Her name was Autumn. Again, this is all pre the actual story events. I was just kind of explaining it for purposes, I guess. But they were almost the same age, if not they were the same age, and they had fell in love with each other. They didn't know it, but they had fallen for each other. Um, and her name was Autumn. I'm not sure if I said that a second ago or not, but her name was Autumn, and this went on for years, to the point where, again, they're in high school now. They're falling in love. They're in love with each other, and they're somewhat painfully aware. Like, if this was an anime, this would be one of those "why don't they just kiss" kind of moments almost every episode, where they were painfully unaware of the other person's emotions, even if they had a supporting cast of their own. Like Endry, it's weird. I kind of gave him like maybe his family, and Yuki technically was also his quote unquote support or the other character he'd turn to. I didn't give him any like friends at the time. Uh, Autumn, however, she had her cousin Patricia in her corner. Now, I will say, because again, this is a new version of the story and whatnot, I was free to redo some characters. Patricia was probably the character I redid the most, or I guess the most drastic form. Uh, Patricia, initially in the first three versions of the story, was this smaller, younger character. Like, as if, let's say, Andrea and Autumn were about 15, 16. Patricia was supposed to be about like 11, 12 years old. The child, essentially. She was a really energetic younger sibling who clung to them for reasons I never went into. But they loved her, she loved them, and they had like a little dynamic going. I took that, and in version 4 of the story, the one I'm currently talking about, I had changed her to a more outgoing, extremely social, free spirited lesbian cousin of Autumn. The lesbian part wasn't necessarily important, at least at this point in the story. I just felt like having things a little bit differently, and I was like, you know what? Why not? So there's that. And this is like, after that, this is also where I kind of gave into my thoughts and potential desires for a toxic love triangle kind of situation. Um, I say that because no one was really dating. Everyone had their own agendas. You know, Yuki was actively chasing Endry, and he wasn't exactly saying no to any of it. He was kind of letting it happen. They were still close friends at the time. She was hot. He was attractive. He was technically single, so he could do whatever, even if he had a crush on someone. Um, So she would aggressively flirt with him, very openly flirt with him, and he would kind of let her. Maybe go so far as to say maybe occasionally going with it, but that would happen. And this led to a scene in a classroom. And again, they're of age, or at least as a teenager, you think, oh, I have these emotions. I'm old enough to do something. You try a few things, whether or not your parents say you're old enough to or not. Um, and they had an intimate moment. I won't go into details, obviously, but in that moment or after that moment, this had pushed Endry into further confusion into what he wanted or who he wanted, I should say, and it kind of gave Yuki a little bit more room to push into that. And again, this is my like desire for that toxic love triangle. This is where things begin to get really crazy, or really dive into the toxic end of things. But at that point into the story, and some chapters in, I had about three dynamics going. Again, this is really targeted towards Yuki, Endry, and Autumn. The first dynamic was Endry and Autumn having that wholesome yet oblivious relationship with each other. They were best friends who were hopelessly in love with the other person, weren't entirely aware of it themselves, and therefore were even more oblivious to it when it came to each other. You had Yuki as the second dynamic. She was absolutely ravenous, obsessed at this point with Endry. And she was quite literally in everyone's faces about it. This was the thing of just like, they may not be together, but everyone kind of knew to back off kind of situation. And Yuki made sure of it. Uh, then there was Dynamic 3, where Autumn, to her own right, was for some reason, not for some reason, but to herself, some reason, envious and mildly afraid of Yuki for who she was. And again, this is without really knowing that her and Endry had an intimate moment, which kind of brings me to my next point. In one of the next chapters, I actually decided to give an entire chapter, or at least a decent bit of it, to a scene where it really feels like Yuki finally got what she wanted. Again, no details will be added. You'll have to use your imagination. But at this point in the story, I believe I had introduced a few characters, as I had in the previous versions of the story. I had introduced everyone to the mission, aka I had now introduced the plot of the story itself. And then because of that, I felt like could give myself a little bit of a reward when it came to character stuff. So I had isolated Endry and Yuki. Uh, Now that moment finally came, and yeah, they went at it. It was initiated by Yuki, but I really wanted to kind of get into that pain and toxic aspect of what I wanted to build. So I had Autumn witness not necessarily the acts of what they did, but she kind of witnessed the kiss that led to the actions between Endry and Yuki. She was angry, she was heartbroken, and that for some reason now just finally coming to grips with her emotions on him. Uh, the morning after, Endry and Yuki had their time. Endry, also quite like a scumbag, had realized his emotions. Call it post-nut clarity, if you will. He had told Yuki that he felt, as she was lying in bed, he had told her how he felt. He told her he did feel something for her, and while he wouldn't really actively seek her for it, that being the sex that they had, that was really all he felt for her. He didn't feel love for her, at least not romantic love. He felt lust for her. He felt companionship with her as a friend, but he didn't feel compelled to be in a romantic relationship with her. In his mind, yeah, she was fantastic for a good time, but not really for the long time. You know, that time had passed, and he finally came to admit it. Um, and he had to tell her that he loved her, just not in the way that she loved him, and she obviously didn't take it well. And that was the point where I really wanted to plant the seed of betrayal for Yuki's character. Uh, and I don't mean that he betrayed her in that moment. I meant that she would betray the cast, essentially. From here, she would spiral. She would absolutely spiral into delusional madness that would see her go from a manic anger to a denial and disillusioned reality, as if he had never told her anything. And her mind would split. From that point on, her mind would split into two personalities. One being from the night before, where she's fully in love with him, she's obsessed with him, that's going to be her man, to the one that was there for the conversation in the morning, the one that's angry, bitter, who feels like she's been used and wasted, now cast aside, which again, rightfully so. Uh, she just couldn't really decide on which one she wanted to be. And from there, Andrew would confront Autumn with his feelings. And every single truth between them at that point would come out. Again, I'm not at this point really going along with what changed in the fourth volume. I'm kind of going into the major points of it at this point, because I more or less had done some of the same stuff, or tried to do the same stuff between versions. So at this point, this is ironically enough where the relationship between Ender and Autumn would kind of begin. Now, obviously, it's starting on broken glass. They were single, yes, but he had sex with the woman that Autumn was kind of competing with, whether she knew it or not. Like, if they were so into each other, why'd he do that kind of situation? But that's where their, relationship would begin. It would be rough, but that's where it began. And the toxic love triangle would, realistically speaking, in this version of the story, be a good amount of fuel for the events of what would happen. I should also mention at this point in the story, not only did I go over the existing characters, but I also introduced a pair of characters, a completely new pair of characters, Viola and Raven. This pair was, it was a doomed love. Long story short, 'cause I think I spent a chapter or two on this and trying to give characters a backstory. Raven was a mercenary. She found herself injured. I believe it's comical in my head now, but basically she was injured. Things were happening, and she was tumbling down a hillside or whatever. Viola, this sweetheart, this sweet little housewife to a rather abusive man, she would take in Raven to kind of just like help heal her up, essentially. I should take a side note to mention that in this story, magic kind of existed. It was more of a science-based magic, but it was still a thing. So now Raven would be nursed to health, and the abusive husband would really not be a fan of this. Just to be a dick. Just to be a dick. She wouldn't really be a fan of his abuse either, and Raven, just being the total girl boss that she was, would fight him in this. I won't get into the details of every single thing, but I will say it did end in the death of the abusive husband and Viola's freedom. It's kind of through this origin point that the two would have shared a bond. Also, side note, I will say that here as well, I did base it off of two people I knew in life. They are together. As far as I know, they're still together. And yeah, I knew they wouldn't really be mad at this caricature of them, because I had spoken to them previously kind of about it, and they were all over the whole like doomed characters idea. So yeah. Anyways, the mission for Viola now was to kind of get back to her family that happened to be on another planet, and unfortunately, they would never really succeed in that. Before the book would finish, they would fall in love, but they would die together, unfortunately. Again, it sucks. It really sucks, but that's what it is. Looking back at it, version 4, everything included, I really wanted to dive into setting up the emotional bits of a story first. Yes, I added lore. I even went super in depth when it came to trying to explore each character, and I didn't even get to tell you guys about everything I tried to do with characters. I just focused on 3. I really did focus on the trio of Endry, Autumn, and Yuki. I also at this point began to twist the story into something that still would have the original plot, but really developed things that I myself didn't fully understand. And that's kind of what happened with Volume 4. Now, Volume 5, uh, to kind of skip to the next one, Volume 5, I really don't fully remember everything. I remember, I remember it being there, existing, um, and I think it was the most developed one. I think in my documents, it's not even we're at 2 pages of content, which I think is hilarious because I remember there being so much more. Oh, wait, I was wrong. Okay, oh, yep, I was wrong. Turns out I had two separate documents for this. There were two copies of it. The first one just existed somewhere, and that was the one with the 2 pages. So I guess I made a secondary copy somewhere else and just started working on that. Okay. I do remember once again aging up all the characters. Um, so yeah, version 4 of the story, I had changed the lore, and in version 5, I had done so even more. I have negated that entire plant-based planet. It was now just two, because again, I didn't do anything with that one, so I just left it alone. And there were now those two, Etheria and Mysteria, were in very close relationship to each other. It was no longer a point of, hey, you send some of our people over here, we'll help you up. It was more so that the two were kind of united, as if this had been a thing for years, you know? They were both kind of integrated into each other. Uh, I should add at this point, no longer did humanity divide itself into three. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, the two societies were intermingling. Now, I will admit that at this point, the story had I think this was the last time the story really kind of maybe resembled the original plot of me and my friends going to space. Uh, I know at this point in the story, version 5, I do believe I was very much out of high school at the time. I was probably in college. I hadn't spoken to really any of the friends I had at that time. Like to this day, yeah, I talked to two of them, my main two friends that I had in high school. But outside of that, everyone else I just kind of lost contact with. So no longer was this based on me, my friends. It was really just the characters I made based off them and the new personalities I decided to give them. Uh, this would start with Carmen, the leader of these space missions, well known for her status and accomplishments. That was also just happened to be in charge of the ship that Endry and his friends were going to be on. It also just so happened to be Endry's cousin. Now, this was a shout out to a friend of mine in high school. We're real close, and I don't know why. I just kind of thought of her as family, so I kept calling her my cousin. Uh, Again, don't know where it came from. Don't know where she is now. I hope she's doing all right. Uh, but yeah, no, this character was based off of her, to name it all. Um, Now, she was on Mysteria, serving as a general. Andrea and Autumn were now Etherians, so instead of being humans, they were now space elves functionally. Uh, Andrew wanted to follow in his cousin's footsteps, and Autumn was more or less just kind of tagging along for the ride. Uh, the two still had a love for each other, although this time it was more playful in nature, which made it really easy to hide their emotions for each other that I still didn't have them know about. But at least this time around, it wasn't a thing of just like, oh, it's so obvious they like each other. Why don't they kiss? It was more so they were on the edge of that little relationship. They were, it's kind of like they were close friends. This time again, from childhood, they'd just kind of been around each other all their lives. So it really hadn't popped up as much. Yuki around this time, however, was not as aggressive, nor was she that horny. Instead, this time around, actually, I had her remain as she was still a childhood friend of Endry's at least, but she was human. She was the daughter to a very wealthy and influential human family who had met Endry in, her childhood years. They had become friends. She had grown fond of him as one of the people who treated her as a regular person rather than some princess to be feared or used. Because again, while she was still young, she was from a very influential family. Andrew did not care for that at all, nor did he fully understand it as a kid. But you know, they were friends. That's who he saw her as. One day, his family stopped coming to my Syria, so they never saw each other. 20 years later, however, they would reunite. And in those 20 years, she still carried that admiration and potential, like, budding love for her friends. Like, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, at the time of the story, or I guess now I'm just making it up to myself. Uh, at the time Andrew basically disappeared, she started to love him and like really like this is like that love that turns into love. You don't know about it, but it's something you have more or less, and you have to come to grips with it. She was starting to get that, and she disappeared, which she wasn't happy about. It did break her a little bit. She didn't have resentment towards him. She just stopped seeing him, and she wondered what happened to him. Um, Now, it should be said that this version of the story, as well, I got rid of the smut. Uh, I had even gotten to a point in the story where the mission was getting underway, and Carmen was recruiting her characters from previous versions of the story. I even left my note for myself. But to circle back a little bit more, yeah, I had gotten rid of the smut. I think in this version of the story, I was trying to tell myself what belongs here, what doesn't, what's going on. And I feel like, yeah, you can write a story with smut in it, but not in the way I did. I kind of threw it in there just because, undeservingly so. Um, and I just got rid of it. Now, this time around, circling back a little bit more, this is what I said to myself in the note of version 5. And I quote, "This is where I stopped the story and basically changed the plot. I kept some core aspects and characters, but scrapped most of this. Although further thought, I told myself all this effort shouldn't go to waste, as well as so many previous designs I had, so this may as well end up being a story of its own at some point." End quote. And yeah, that's actually where Living Among Stars died. I had written 5 versions of the story, each trying to evolve and improve what the story previous had done and laid down, but keeping the core concept. This ultimately led to the idea and the story really being split between 2 entities. Etheria and its likeness actually grew far beyond what I could imagine. And when I say far beyond, I mean genuinely. I dove into the lore, even to this day, which is, I guess, about 5 to 6 years later, uh, from stopping Living Among Stars. I'm still developing it. Etheria has become a world and continuity of its own, which I may or may not share one day. You know, I I developed cultures, habitats, people's practices, all that fun jazz. That's how inspired Etheria got me. I turned it into its own thing. Even tried to make a story out of it, which I may revisit, but who knows. Um, the second entity actually became where the plot and core of idea of characters exploring space became something called Project Star Trail. Now that I'll have to discuss another time. Because this video, I know when I was writing it, I wasn't sure. I just got into flow state. But even talking about it now, this video is honestly getting kind of long. I don't know if you guys want to hear me yap about that for too long. Um, so at some point, I'll give you some background and whatnot into Star Trail and how it came to existence and what it's become. But as of right now, I guess to close it out, I'll just kind of chat with you guys about Living Among Stars, what it was, and kind of what it means to me. You know, if it wasn't clear already, this was a huge passion of mine and still is. Looking back at things, I kind of have to sit myself down and think where I was at the time. Physically, sure, maybe not like where I was sitting and what was going on, but where in life I was, you know, mentality, all that, what was going on with me at the time. Living Among Stars, much like the game, was an escape for me. I won't go into specifics. I won't go into all that fun jazz. But it was still something I very much thought would be fun. It was a combination of a lot of things I loved at the time and maybe still cherish. Uh, but it was a combination of all those things that I put together. Uh, Friendships that I cherished, concepts that I liked. I still love space to this day. It was all that put into one story. And I could never really settle. That's why there are five versions. I could never settle on the one, partially because things kept shifting at that time in my life, but also because I felt like certain things just could have been better. You know, that's proof in, like I said, the story evolved. I could have just kept it as maybe some high school or college students about to take some entrance exams, and now they're very unprepared for the fire that they've been thrown in. I could still do that, and I may, but that original story, that original concept, living among the stars, it still speaks a lot to me. Living Among Stars wasn't just the book I was writing, it's not just the title, it's something I maybe not necessarily wanted to do, but it's still something that envisioned my spirit at the time. Just the essence of me as a person, you know, to be out there in the unknown and just the cool of anything could happen, just out there. I don't know. I don't know. It still means a lot to me to this day. I still laugh at the fact that I had five different concepts, and this story and a lot of the things in it actually spawned concepts of their own, like Viola and Raven. They're actually now featured in their own story. They still have a love for each other. I won't go into specifics, but they became a story of their own. Etheria became a story of their own. Star Trail is supposed to be the retold, remastered version of Living Among Stars. And so many others. So many others. But listener, that's where I'll leave it for now. There will be a part two to this video. There will be a part two where I go more into Project Star Trail, what it is, what it's become, and its various versions, but I'll leave this here for now. So, until next time, hope you have a good one. Signal out.